In this session, we're going to discuss the zone-based policy firewall, and in the next, we'll configure a zone-based firewall. Common terms associated with a firewall are inside, outside, and demilitarized zone. The inside is our trusted network, so in this case, that's going to be our intranet up here. Right, we'll call him the inside. Or our most trusted network. This is basically the area that I want to protect, right? And then we have the outside, usually some sort of public network, the internet, right? Outside. And then we have our demilitarized zone. So our inside is our trusted network. Our outside is our untrusted network. So it's untrusted. Our DMZ will allow some access to servers from this outside or public network without allowing those same users to get into our inside network. Because again, this is what we're trying to protect. We're trying to protect our internal, our trusted network while still making sure that our users can function and making sure that if we have corporate partners, we have customers, things like that, they can get access to servers or services, that we provide them. So the DMZ can do that for us. Maybe we have our web server in our DMZ. Here we're showing a web server, a mail server, and DNS. And we allow some access from the outside world into that DMZ without having to house that web server in that inside protected. It's almost like another layer of protection. We'll let you go here, you'll get the things you need, but we don't want to take the chance of you being able to go here, right? So traffic, so how does traffic usually flow? Let me get rid of this here for a second. Oh. Now we do have a lot of options. Traffic doesn't necessarily have to flow all the ways that we say by default. As we'll see with our zone-based firewall when I go through and configure that, we'll see some things a little bit differently with our ASA, but we can still do pretty much anything we want. But there are some generally kind of accepted things. So for example, if we're going from our inside or our trusted network, generally we allow traffic from the inside to the DMZ. I'm sorry, to the outside network, right? Inside, outside, usually that's, that's normally let through. DMZ to the outside, typically permitted. Depends upon what services are being used or housed in the DMZ. Some things, as we said, the definition of DMZ, depending upon the service, will configure to allow certain services to be accessed from the outside into the DMZ. We won't allow outside to inside access generally, and we don't automatically allow or generally allow access from the DMZ to the inside. Remember, this is the network we're trying to protect. Now we may, if something initiates on the inside and goes to the DMZ, we could look at allowing that return traffic as part of our flow, and we'll discuss that more as we go through the firewall, the zone-based firewall discussion and configuration. But generally, you think of these as, say, having they're more untrusted. And if you're more untrusted, you're not by default going to be allowed in, and generally not allowed in. So this is our most trusted network here. Right? So we have a lot of trust for him. He gets to go out if he wants. We have a little trust here. So he can go out to there, and really we have no trust here. And that's all going to be based upon, we're going to have to, I guess, say punch holes to go from the untrusted area even into the DMZ. Okay. I call it lower privilege to higher privilege sort of stuff. All right. So let's look real specifically at the zone-based policy firewall. The zone-based firewall allows us as administrators to create zones. So instead of applying specific things to interfaces, so some of our classic firewall functioning was that we would apply things right to particular interfaces. Now we create zones that have an interface or multiple interfaces as members of those zones. And members of the same zone would have the same features or policies. So if I create zone 1 and I want to put 3 interfaces in it, all those 3 interfaces part of zone 1 have the same policies. And then we have the self zone, which is the router itself. Traffic originating or destined to the router, originating from the router or destined to the router itself is part of the self zone. So that's going to be control and management plane traffic, so routing protocols, SSH. When we go through, we'll configure zones. Generally, we create zones. So zones are created. Let's just call it, we'll just go ahead and call it zone 1, right? We create zone 1. We add an interface to zone 1. Maybe we add 2. This is not how we do it. I have the commands coming up. Don't worry, right? And then we create a zone, what we call a zone pair, which pairs the traffic. I'm going to show that in a second. I have to have 2 zones. And when you think about a zone pair, you're going to think about the flow of the traffic. Which direction, how do I want traffic to flow? And that's how I would create my zone pair. And then I would go ahead and apply the policy, or have a policy. I would apply a policy to this traffic flow here. So create the zones, put interfaces in the zones, create a zone pair, which is basically what you think of as the traffic flow, and then you apply a policy to that traffic or to that flow. All right, so here's just a real simplistic example to help you visualize it. We might have in our previous or our network terms, when we discussed our network terms, here I just called them zone 1, zone 2, and zone 3. Maybe we would have called this the intranet, right, or the LAN, which would be our trusted network. Maybe this is the internet, or the WAN, or the public. And then maybe this would be our DMZ. We don't have to call it any of those things. I can literally call it zone 1, zone 2, and zone 3 if I want. So when I talked earlier, I had said, or just a moment ago, I had said, well, we create our zones, and we apply interfaces to those zones, or add interfaces to those zones. So let's say this guy is 1, 2, 3, right? So we create our zone, LAN. This is not the proper command. This is just the generalized, okay? So we created it. We go into the interface 1 and tell him he's zone member LAN. Right, so he's a member of this zone, which now makes him, or maybe I should have called it zone 1 since this is what I named it up here anyway. So let me just erase this for a second. I like to give intuitive names to things, but if I'm bouncing back and forth, I don't think that's helpful to you as I look at it again. So let's go just erase these. Whoop. All right, so earlier I talked about zones. So we create the zone, call it zone 1. Oh, losing my pen. Zone 1, interface, zone member. This is member, not the right command. This is just examples. Zone 1. Okay. And we do the same thing, say, for zone 3. Zone 3. And then I will apply 03 to zone 3. So you go in the interface, tell it he's a zone member of 3, a zone member of zone 3. Apologize for my great writing, right? So now we've got 2 zones, and they're members of, they have interfaces as part of them. And then we'll pair those zones, right? And the command is actually some along zone pair. We'll look at it more closely, right? And then we need to have a source and destination. So zone pair zone 1 to zone 3. So we create that zone pair. What we're saying is traffic flowing from this zone, from zone 1, and going to zone 3 is going to have a particular policy associated with it. Right? So that's how we permit or deny traffic or inspect traffic, whatever we're going to do with it, that's how we do it. We have zones, we put interfaces in them, we apply policies to those zone pairs. Okay? And then we'd apply a policy, and maybe our policy says to inspect web traffic. And what that means is if somebody in zone 1 wants to go to a web server in zone 3, they're going to be allowed to do that. And because we use the keyword inspect, the traffic will be statefully inspected. It'll keep track of the state, make sure it's part of this initial flow, and that it's HTTP traffic. If it is, it'll be allowed back in, basically to respond to whoever it is that wanted to get, say, to the web server. So it's kind of how zones work. Let's look specifically at some of the pass and drop rules. So the traffic rules for zones are, we're going to pass the traffic if the interfaces are not part of a zone. So if we created zones but we didn't put any interfaces in them, the traffic is just going to pass amongst them. In a sense, it's almost like they're part of the same zone, the non-existent zone, so they're part of nothing. We're going to pass traffic if the interfaces are in the same zone. So if I put 2 interfaces in zone 1, traffic will be allowed to pass between both those interfaces. Remember, we do a zone pair, we look at traffic flows. So inside the same zone, we don't need to create a zone pair. The traffic will automatically be able to flow amongst the interfaces that are in the same zone. We're going to drop the traffic if one interface is a zone member and the other isn't. So that's one thing you got to be careful of, the order of operations when you configure something. Once you put an interface in a zone, if none of your other interfaces are also either in that zone or in a zone at all, we're going to drop that traffic. So that whatever interface is in that you've put in that zone, he's lost connectivity for a little bit, right? Drop traffic if each of the interfaces are in different zones and there's no zone pair. So if we did zone and we did zone 1 and zone 2 and we didn't create a zone pair for them, as I demonstrated briefly earlier, we're going to drop that traffic. Okay? If the interfaces are a zone pair, then the action will depend upon what you've configured. So I created different zones, I put interfaces in them, and I create a zone pair between them. So between zone 1 and zone 3, now I apply a policy. Whatever happens to that traffic between those paired zones depends upon the policy that you wrote. If no policy exists and you're going from the trusted network to the untrusted, then the traffic will pass. And then we have, remember, the default zone. So these are all, administratively configured zones. Whoops, circle. And you have the self zone, right? Traffic passes if the router itself is the source or destination. We can modify the behavior of the self zone, but by default, if the router itself is the source of the traffic or the destination of the traffic, it'll pass. Now, when we apply our policies, we have some actions. So what are the actions that I can place upon my traffic? I can pass it, which is like a permit statement in an ACL. So I can just say, go ahead and pass. Here, we're not looking at anything stateful, right? So here, we're going to pass the traffic. It's similar to a permit statement in an ACL, similar to a drop statement if I drop it. Whoop. And then inspect says, go ahead and do inspection. So do a stateful packet inspection. If I want to be able to allow traffic back, so when I talked about going, say, in to out to, say, a web server, when I talk about having traffic, he goes in and out. If I use just pass as my option, the return traffic won't be allowed, right? But if I use the term inspect as my option, what to do with it, then as long as it's part of, as long as when we look up that state, we look up the state table and see that it was part of that original flow, then the traffic will be allowed back through. And there are different instances where you do want to pass or drop, and we'll probably go through those during the configuration section. But for now, what you need to know is if you pass traffic just because you're passing it in to out, that's fine. It probably gets here, right? But it doesn't come back. If you use the term inspect, it can allow it back through as long as it's in that in our stateful tables, in our state tables. We'll do the stateful packet inspection to make sure that the returning packet or the packet that's trying to return has the information is in the state table for it. Okay, and last we just want to look at the configuration steps before we get into configuration. And kind of what does that look like? I've went through them in a real general term, but they aren't really the right term. So you look at the actual commands. We want to create zones. We'll do that with the zone security command. So zone security and then name whatever I want to name my zone. We want to identify the traffic. So what traffic am I going to do something with? I'm going to identify the traffic using the class map command. In this case, class map type inspect. I can match any, I can match all. There's other things I can match on, but particularly for this type of class map, we're going to match any or match all. Match any means anything in the list below, because after we write in this class map, then we'll tell it what to match. And so let's say I say match HTTP, match SSH, match ICMP. If I do a match any, it can match any of those three. If I do a match all, it has to match all of those criteria, which likelihood of that happening in this particular. There's lots of instances I could do match all, because I could also do access control lists, so I could match particular hosts or subnets, and I then also tell it to match protocol. So then in that instance, I would want to match all, and I would find a matching criteria. And then we give it a class map name. So use the command class map type inspect. Here are your options within that, and then give that a name. And then below that, we're going to match protocol, access groups or access lists, and we can also match other class maps. In the example I gave earlier, I said, well, I could do a match all, and I could use access group to specify particular hosts or subnets. And then below that, I could do a match protocol and match a particular set of protocols. So maybe I'm only allowing 2 hosts to do SSH to somewhere. So I'd have an access list for source and destination, and maybe I would have SSH, a match protocol SSH as the other term or the other criterion. Next, I've got to do something with that traffic. So once that traffic of that type comes in and it matches something, what do I want to do? So let's go ahead and act on that traffic. We'll do that with our policy map command. So policy map type inspect, and then give it a policy map name. Inside the policy map, I want to call my class map that I created up here. I'm going to call that down here. So our policy map type inspect, and then class type inspect, and it will be whatever, whoa, didn't mean to cross that out. It'll be whatever you named it. It'll be whatever this name is up there. So I'm going to call my class map in the second step. I'm going to call it my policy map, and then I'm going to decide what I want to do with it. And again, I can inspect it, pass it, or drop it. Next, I want to create a zone pair and then connect that to the policy map. So remember I said we had to create zones, we had to identify the traffic, we got to do something with the traffic. What are we going to do? And then that's the policy we create. We have to apply that policy to the traffic flow. The traffic flow is the zone pair. So create the zone pair with the zone pair security name, give it a name, whatever you want to give it, then the keyword source, and then the zone name has to be a name you've created in this step up here. So whatever we created up here is going to be called down here. And then a destination and where to go. So let's say if we wanted to just call them trusted and untrusted. Up here, I would have created something that said trusted. I would have said zone security, trusted. Then I would have created another one that said zone security untrusted. And you have to make sure the names are intuitive to you. So then here, let's say I want to go from the trusted network, what we would usually call our LAN or our inside network, to our untrusted. Then that's the flow, that's the pair that we create. So the zone name we call here would then be trusted, and over here it would be untrusted. And then apply the policy with the service policy command. So service policy type inspect policy map. That's where we're going to call this, whatever we named our policy map up here, we're going to call that down here. And finally, we're going to add interfaces to our zone. We'll go into the interface configuration mode. So if I want to apply gig 0 or add gigabit 0 to our trusted network, I'd go in gig 0, right, or 00 or whatever, go into the interface configuration, then type the command zone member security, and then the name. So in this instance, it would be zone member security trusted. So that's it. It seems like a lot of steps, but what's kind of cool about the way this is done is that I can reuse them. So later, if I like the criteria here, whatever I list in my class map, I can actually use this class map again instead of having to retype it. And it becomes very intuitive to know, okay, these are the steps, these are the clumps of configuration. And that's it. In the next video, we'll actually go through and configure. Oh, I forgot one more thing. If we do pass or drop, and I don't think I had it in here or discussed it, we can also log it. So if we want to log when something passes or when something's dropped, you would do the command pass and then put log right next to it. Okay. Inspect does not have, inspect keeps track of a lot of stuff anyway, right? Because we've got our state tables. And so there's no such thing as inspect space log in the command, but you could do a pass space log or a drop space log and log when something is passed or dropped. Okay, that's it.